In the vast Boston mansion, a baby has been crying endlessly since his mother's death during childbirth. Nothing, neither formulas nor experienced nannies, can soothe him. Until, in the heavy silence of the house, a humble maid, driven by instinct, does something unexpected. She holds the baby in her arms, and for the first time the mansion is filled with peace. But this is only the beginning of a story where love arises from where no one ever imagined. And before we dive into this tale full of surprises and impossible choices, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications to follow every detail of this journey, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can go. In the vast mansion of Boston, silence was broken only by the relentless cries of Noah, the newborn baby. Since the death of his mother during childbirth, that house had lost its warmth and had become a stage of anguish. Every scream echoed through the long, cold corridors, as if the walls amplified the emptiness that reigned there. Michael Collins, a widower and successful businessman, faced a pain that no contract could ever resolve. Each night, the scene repeated itself. Noah cried without rest, and nothing seemed to work. It was as though his mother's absence was an open wound that no superficial care could heal. The baby's desperation was not just a physical need, but an instinctive search for comfort. Despite its grandeur, the mansion proved incapable of offering that kind of human warmth. The nannies hired arrived with modern techniques and rehearsed speeches. None, however, managed to soothe little Noah. Formulas, lullabies, carefully studied rocking all failed. It was as if his cry was a constant reminder that something essential was missing, something that no amount of money could bring back. Michael, increasingly exhausted, wandered through the corridors like a defeated man. His image of a confident and determined businessman crumbled before an inconsolable child. He understood numbers, negotiations, market strategies, but found himself lost before the fragility of a son who longed for more than material resources. Noah's cry filled every space. The sound seemed to grow disproportionately, invading every room, every chamber, every corner of the house. The servants, once accustomed to the impeccable routine of the mansion, now exchanged worried glances. It was impossible to ignore that call, so small and yet so powerful. The nights grew long and the days endless. The mansion, a symbol of prestige and wealth, now felt like a gilded prison. Michael tried to keep his composure, but his face revealed the constant struggle between pride and helplessness. With every failed attempt, the feeling of failure in his role as a father grew stronger. The absence of the mother hung like a shadow. Each time Noah cried, it was as if he reminded everyone of the life that had been lost at the moment of his arrival. The entire house seemed to carry this duality, the celebration of a new life and the irreparable pain of loss. It was an environment filled with contrasts, where joy and sorrow mingled without rest. And it was within this setting of grief and despair that the story began to change. For when everything seemed without solution, life found a way to show that answers could come from the most unexpected places. The mansion, which until then had only known cries, was about to be invaded by a different silence, the silence of peace that would arrive in the most surprising way. In that imposing house, accustomed to hosting luxurious dinners and formal gatherings, a different sound stood out, the uncontrollable cry of Noah. While everyone tried unsuccessfully to find a solution, Sarah Miller, the humble maid, felt her heart race. A single mother, she knew well the meaning of that cry. It was not just hunger or discomfort. It was the plea of a baby searching for true comfort. Sarah set aside her cleaning rags and walked toward the crib. Her steps, timid and almost forbidden, contrasted with the firmness of her instinct. When she saw Noah so small and vulnerable, something inside her spoke louder. There was no doubt action was needed. In a natural gesture, guided by the experience of being a mother, she held him tenderly in her arms. The baby, once overcome by despair, immediately found change in Sarah's embrace. The warmth of her body, the gentle firmness of her arms brought him security. It was as if he had finally found what he had been searching for since birth. The mansion, accustomed to the emptiness of mechanical sounds, was suddenly immersed in unexpected silence. Moved by maternal instinct, Sarah made a daring decision. Knowing that her own son, Ethan, still nursed at her breast, she brought Noah close and began to feed him. It was a silent act, yet filled with meaning. For the first time in days, the baby slept peacefully, satisfied not only in hunger but also in his need for affection. The contrast was striking. Where nannies had failed with elaborate techniques, Sarah succeeded with a simple human gesture. There was no luxury, no formal training, only the connection between a woman who understood the pain of motherhood and a child deprived of a mother's arms. What seemed impossible became reality in just a matter of minutes. The household staff, discreet witnesses to the scene, stood in complete silence. No one dared interrupt that moment of rare delicacy. The mansion, once dominated by restlessness, now seemed to breathe in peace. It was as though Noah's heartbeat dictated the rhythm of the entire house. And at last that heart beat calmly. Sarah, with the baby in her arms, felt the duality of her position. On one side, she was merely an employee, invisible to her employers. On the other, she was the only one capable of giving the child what he so desperately needed. It was impossible not to notice the weight of that contrast. Humility and greatness coexisted in the same act. And so, in that unexpected instant, the story took a different turn. The mansion, marked by grief and silence, was now touched by the quiet courage of a mother who did not ignore life's call. But while peace reigned for those few moments, firm footsteps approached, about to change everything once again. Michael entered the room with firm steps. The silence he found felt strange, so different from the relentless crying that had become routine. His eyes, accustomed to the chaos of recent days, were met with an unexpected scene. In the center of the room, Sarah was holding Noah in her arms. Noah, the baby who had cried without pause, was finally calm. The contrast was striking. Where so many attempts had failed, Sarah's embrace had brought peace. Michael felt the weight of the scene as though his heart had stopped for a moment. This was not just care, but an unexpected intimacy. The businessman, used to control, was consumed by a mixture of anger and wounded pride. Sarah was only the maid of the mansion. How dared she assume a role that was not hers? To Michael, the scene crossed the line of hierarchy and duty. The silence was broken by his firm voice. He ordered Sarah to step away immediately. His expression carried fury, even though deep inside he recognized the serenity on Noah's face. It was impossible to deny that for the first time the baby seemed at peace. Sarah hesitated. Her arms resisted letting go of Noah, who slept serenely against her chest. She knew that her gesture might cost her job, but she had acted out of instinct. It was impossible to ignore the call of such a defenseless child. Michael repeated the order harshly. There was no room for explanations or excuses. For him, seeing his son in the maid's arms was an unforgivable affront. Pride spoke louder than any silent gratitude he might have felt. With no choice, Sarah placed Noah back in the crib. The room once again filled with tension, now heavier than before. A distance had settled between them. The moment of peace seemed to have been nothing but a fleeting illusion. With a brusque gesture, Michael ordered Sarah to leave the mansion immediately. The silence, once a sign of calm, turned into rupture. The harmony that had just been discovered shattered in seconds, and the doors were about to close on the bond that had begun to form. As soon as Sarah left the mansion, the silence was broken by Noah's cries. The baby, who had experienced only a brief moment of peace, returned to despair. No song, no toy, no formula could ease his anguish. The emptiness of the house seemed to amplify every tear, turning the corridors into echoes of pain. Michael tried to remain calm, but the weight of his decision was becoming unbearable. With every failed attempt to soothe Noah, his sense of helplessness grew. The pride that had led him to expel Sarah now turned into a burden. The businessman was discovering that not all power could buy what was truly missing. The nannies once again circulated through the house, each with her own methods and techniques. Yet none could give the baby the comfort Sarah had provided. Noah continued to cry as if rejecting every alternative. It was a cry that revealed more than physical pain. It revealed absence. The mansion, a symbol of grandeur and status, had become a stage of disorder. The luxury of the furniture, the immaculate paintings, none of it mattered anymore against the endless sound of crying. The environment, once seen as imposing, was now a cold space, incapable of housing joy. The emptiness belonged not only to the walls but also to the heart of those who lived there. Exhausted, Michael wandered the corridors with a lost gaze. At every corner of the house, he remembered the image of Sarah holding Noah tenderly. He tried to push the memory aside, but it returned like an inevitable shadow. The contrast between the baby serene in her arms and the current despair was impossible to ignore. The nights grew even longer. Noah did not sleep, and neither did Michael. The cries seemed to fill not only the rooms but also the father's thoughts. He began to realize that expelling Sarah had created a void greater than any silence could ever fill. The atmosphere of the mansion mirrored Michael's feelings, vast but lonely, beautiful yet lifeless. The tall windows revealed the city outside, but within the house what reigned was isolation. Everything seemed to scream for the absence of the figure who had made such a difference in such a short time. And amid this suffocating solitude, a thought began to take root within Michael. Perhaps he had made an irreparable mistake. The memory of Sarah and the peace she had brought Noah would not leave his mind. The weight of the empty mansion was a sign that something had to change, and soon. The cold night had fallen over New England. Michael drove through the nearly deserted streets, the sound of the engine the only company for his troubled thoughts. The pride that had sustained him in the mansion now seemed to have dissolved, giving way to an even greater emptiness. Noah's cries echoed in his mind as a constant reminder of the mistake he had made. The contrast was painful. Inside the mansion, luxury and power reigned, but outside, Michael sought something that no money could buy: forgiveness. His hands trembled slightly on the wheel, not from the cold but from the uncertainty of what he was about to do. For the first time in a long while, there was no script, only a disarmed heart. He parked in front of the modest building where Sarah lived. The contrast with his own reality was striking. Narrow hallways, dim lights, a humble environment. Michael took a deep breath before climbing the stairs, each step adding to the weight of his decision. He was no longer the confident businessman, but a man in search of redemption. When he knocked on the door, the initial silence felt eternal. Sarah took a few moments before answering. When she finally opened it, she found a weary man, different from the one who had thrown her out only hours earlier. Michael didn't need elaborate words. His expression already carried the weight of regret. Sarah, surprised, didn't know what to say at first. Her protective instinct made her hold Ethan, her son, as if seeking strength in the boy's embrace. The scene reflected the contrast between two worlds. On one side, a woman used to daily struggle. On the other, a man discovering the meaning of humility. Michael then asked for forgiveness. His voice, usually firm and authoritative, now sounded fragile. He did not speak as an employer, but as a desperate father. He admitted that he had failed her, and even more so Noah, who had only found peace in her arms. The weight of his words made the night feel heavier. Sarah listened in silence. Each sentence seemed to chip away at the wall she had built. The request did not erase the pain of the humiliation she had suffered, but it brought something unexpected: sincerity. In Michael's eyes, she saw not only regret, but also the vulnerability of someone who needed her. At last, Michael made his request. He did not want Sarah to return as a maid, but as Noah's exclusive caregiver. It was a gesture of trust and recognition. For the first time, the barrier between master and servant seemed to fall, giving way to a new possibility. The cold, silent night carried within it the promise of change. Sarah returned to the mansion, but not alone. She brought with her Ethan, her son, who soon joined little Noah. Their arrival brought a new energy to the house. Where once only cries echoed, now there were children's laughter, hurried footsteps, and the life that seemed to have abandoned those corridors. The mansion began to breathe again. Michael watched the scene closely. Seeing Noah interact with Ethan filled him with a mix of surprise and hope. The bond between the boys grew quickly, as if they had always known each other. It was something pure, spontaneous, and natural, something no amount of wealth could ever force. For the first time, the mansion felt like a home. Sarah also noticed the changes. By preparing simple meals like homemade hamburgers and Sunday pancakes, she transformed the cold routine into moments of affection. The table, once a symbol of formality, now became a space for conversation, play, and small stories. The luxury remained, but the heart of the house was different. The staff also felt the difference. The heavy atmosphere had dissipated, replaced by a sense of joy. Noah, who once cried endlessly, now smiled often. Ethan, full of childhood energy, ran through the corridors as if they were open fields. The mansion, which once felt suffocating, was now full of life. Michael, accustomed to solemn silence, began to grow used to the noise of childhood. Each burst of laughter from the boys chipped away at the weight he carried. In every gesture of Sarah's, He saw an invisible strength stitching together the broken pieces of his life. Little by little, he discovered that family is not built only from blood, but from presence. At night, when everyone gathered together, the mansion felt transformed. The walls no longer reflected emptiness but warmth. Michael, seated at the table, looked at Sarah with silent gratitude. She had brought him something he hadn't even known he was missing: human warmth, a kind of wealth that could not be bought, only shared. Sarah, in turn, felt her world expand. From a simple and solitary routine, she now had the chance to offer her son experiences she could never have provided alone. Watching Ethan and Noah play together, she realized life was giving her an unexpected gift. Two worlds so different were beginning to intertwine. And so, between simple meals, mornings full of laughter, and calm nights, the mansion was transformed. Michael, Sarah, Noah, and Ethan slowly formed something no one could have predicted: a true home. But fate still held surprises, and the newly found calm would soon be tested by events from the past. The days in the mansion went on full of life. Noah and Ethan ran through the halls, Sarah prepared meals that filled the house with comforting aromas, and Michael found peace in details he had once overlooked. The routine, once cold and solitary, was now marked by small joys. But that tranquility was about to be shaken. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the mansion's windows in gold, an unexpected visitor arrived. It was James Parker, Ethan's father. His eyes carried regret, and his posture revealed a man determined to win back what he had lost. The past had returned without warning, bringing with it painful memories. When Sarah saw James, a whirlwind of emotions overtook her. The man who had abandoned her when she needed him most was now standing before her, asking for another chance. His words, full of promises and apologies, stirred memories she had tried to bury. It was as if two realities collided in that very moment. Michael watched the scene in silence. His heart tightened at the thought of losing Sarah to James. He, who had found in her a new meaning for life, now faced the fear of watching everything fall apart. The businessman, so accustomed to victories, was discovering that love could not be won with strategies, but with surrender. Noah, unaware of the tension, played nearby with Ethan. The two boys, united by innocent friendship, were the link connecting everyone present. For them, there was no past or resentment, only laughter and simple gestures. Yet their play contrasted with the heavy atmosphere among the adults, where difficult choices loomed. James persisted in his words. He spoke of regret, of rebuilding, of family. Sarah listened, torn between the pain of the past and the strength of a present that showed her a new path. Each sentence brought back the memory of abandonment, but also the question of what would be best for Ethan. Michael, still silent, bore the pain of a man afraid of losing once more. He did not interrupt, but his eyes revealed how deeply those words wounded him. Inside, a battle raged, whether to respect Sarah's space or to fight for the feelings growing between them. The mansion seemed once again to sink into silence, this time marked by uncertainty. Sarah felt the weight of the decision approaching. The return of James carried the possibility of resuming an interrupted story, but also the risk of reliving old pain. At the same time, her life with Michael appeared as a future full of hope. Between broken promises and a new reality, her heart was divided. Sarah felt more divided than ever before. On one side, James offered her the chance to resume an interrupted story, though marked by wounds. On the other, Michael represented an unexpected future, built on trust and small gestures of care. Her heart wavered, like a fragile scale weighed down by difficult choices. In the days that followed, tension hung in the air. James appeared often, trying to prove he had changed. He brought flowers, made promises, and spoke about family. But every time Sarah listened, she remembered the moment he left her alone, with Ethan still a baby in her arms. It was a scar hard to forget. At the same time, Michael remained present in a quiet way. He didn't make grand declarations, but showed himself through actions. In the mornings, he prepared coffee for Sarah. At night, he helped soothe Noah when he was restless. Between a summer barbecue in the backyard and a Thanksgiving dinner, he showed that love could be built in details. Ethan sensed the difference. With James, the father he barely knew, there was curiosity but also strangeness. With Michael, he felt safe, as if that man were already a part of his life. The children, with their innocent wisdom, were silent witnesses to what the adults had not yet named. Sarah, caught between James's attempts and Michael's constancy, found herself lost in memories. She remembered sleepless nights caring for Ethan alone, the pain of lacking support, and also the peace she had found in her moments beside Michael. It was as though past and present clashed within her. Michael, despite his fear, did not pressure her. He knew that any forced choice would lose its meaning. Instead, he let Sarah see who he truly was, a man who, despite his flaws, was willing to learn the meaning of loving again. That stance made him linger even more in her thoughts. James, on the other hand, tried to win her over with words. He spoke of fresh starts, of correcting mistakes, of giving Ethan the family he deserved. But his words, even if sincere, sounded fragile against the memory of abandonment. The past cannot be erased with promises alone, and Sarah knew this. And so, between family gatherings, moments of tenderness, and unexpected visits, Sarah carried within her the heavy task of choosing. Two worlds pulled her in opposite directions, one that had hurt her but begged for a second chance, and another that appeared before her with the promise of true love. Her heart had yet to decide which path to follow. The snowstorm covered the city in white, wrapping the mansion in an almost sacred silence. Inside, however, the air was filled with apprehension. Noah had fallen ill. His small body was feverish, and each heavy breath sounded like a plea for help. Sarah stayed by the crib tirelessly, softly singing lullabies to soothe the boy. Michael watched from a distance, his heart tightening. Seeing Sarah care for Noah stirred something in him that went beyond gratitude. It felt as though fate had placed this woman in his life not only to save his son, but also to fill the emptiness he had carried since his wife's death. The blizzard outside reflected the storm within him. Sarah held Noah's hand gently, whispering prayers for the baby's recovery. Her tired eyes shone with determination. Even exhausted, she never stepped away for a moment. For her, caring for a sick child was more than a duty. It was an expression of unconditional love, the same she had lived with Ethan. Overcome with emotion, Michael moved closer. He sat beside Sarah, silent at first, as if afraid of breaking the fragile atmosphere of the moment. The warmth of their closeness brought a strange feeling, both frightening and comforting. He no longer saw just a woman by the crib, but someone who had become essential. The hours dragged on, time seeming suspended. Sarah remained steady while Michael kept his eyes fixed on his son and on her. At a certain point, unable to hold back his feelings, he took her hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried everything he had left unsaid. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking, "it's not only my son who needs you. I don't know how to live without you anymore." The words broke the silence like a soft thunder, heavy with truth. Emotion poured from his voice, revealing the man behind the armor of the businessman. Sarah looked at him, surprised, unsure if she could believe what she had heard. The intensity of the moment surrounded her, as though the world had stopped. Her heart, already torn between two paths, raced at his confession. Fear and passion intertwined like the blizzard outside, intense, relentless, inevitable. Then, as if guided by the same impulse, they kissed. It was a kiss restrained by hesitation, but marked by the fire of something that had been growing for a long time. The cold of the night contrasted with the warmth of that gesture, as though, for a moment, all the emptiness of the past had transformed into hope. The following morning brought a different kind of silence to the mansion. It was no longer the heavy silence of mourning or solitude, but a serene pause after the storm. Noah, regaining his strength, rested peacefully, while Ethan played nearby with contagious joy. The house, once an empty monument, now overflowed with life. In the main hall, Sarah gathered the courage for her final decision. James stood there, steady, his eyes filled with hope. Michael, in contrast, remained silent, yet his presence spoke louder than words. Sarah's heart pounded hard, as though each beat reminded her that this choice would change everything. James, with an emotional voice, once again asked her for a second chance. He spoke of regret, of rebuilding, of becoming a family again. The words were pretty, but they echoed from a broken past. Sarah knew that promises alone could not sustain what had already collapsed. Michael, on the other hand, gave no speeches. He simply looked at Sarah with eyes full of truth. She remembered the night before, his care by Noah's crib, the warmth of the kiss they had shared in the midst of the snowstorm. That memory spoke louder than any rehearsed phrase. Looking at the two boys, Sarah took a deep breath. Ethan watched her with the innocence of someone who only wanted stability. Noah smiled peacefully, unaware of the gravity of the moment. And then she understood. She could not choose for the past, but for the future. True love was not in promises, but in the gestures repeated every day. With firmness, Sarah turned to James. "You left me when I needed you most. What we had is in the past." Her voice, though gentle, carried the strength of someone who no longer wished to relive pain. James lowered his eyes, defeated, realizing this was a door that would never open again. Then she turned to Michael. "It was you who showed me what true love is." Tears streamed down her face, but a smile shone through. Michael embraced her, holding her with the intensity of someone who knows the value of what he has won. Noah and Ethan, as if they understood, laughed together in that very moment. The mansion would never be the same again. Where once there had been mourning, now echoed laughter. The smell of apple pie drifted from the kitchen, blending with the sound of children running. Within walls that had once been cold, a home was born, and with it, a new family that united two worlds forever. So, after living through this journey full of difficult choices, it's impossible to stay indifferent, isn't it? Now let me ask you, if you were in Sarah's place, would you have the courage to choose the future instead of the past? Or would you let fear speak louder? The truth is, life puts us face to face with decisions like this every single day, and only those who dare to choose with their hearts can truly write a new story. So, if this narrative touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel right now, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in her place. I really want to hear your opinion and continue this conversation with you in the next chapters.